So we're really excited today to have some folks from IBTCI, from i-APS, and then from BHA as well to talk about TPM, its importance, and just some overall good practices for going into your TPM agreements and partnerships. I'm really excited today that we have a new IDEAL staff member that's going to be helping us with HuMEL as a whole. Our M&E team at IDEAL is going to be kind of supporting HuMEL more holistically. Before it was largely Chris Riggs, who has moved on to greener pastures. We were sorry to see him go. But today I am really happy to introduce you to Michael Wilcox. He's joined IDEAL from CRS. And so he's going to be hosting and emceeing this quarter's HuMEL. So Mike, over to you, and I'll see everybody else during the Q&A. I'll be jumping forward during that. So excited for this one.
All right, hello, my name is Michael Wilcox. I'm the Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist here on the IDEAL project. I've been on this project for about 4 months. I want to welcome everyone to this HuMEL. We're excited to have you. I think we're all acquainted with Zoom, and I just kind of wanted to remind everyone that to keep your microphone muted when you can, keep your video on if that allows, and the meeting will be recorded, so you'll have this to reference later.
Hello.
Hello, buenos días.
Bien, gracias a Dios, bien.
Okay. If you have any questions at any point during the meeting, please feel free to send a message in the chat box to anyone with IDEAL in the name, but specifically Sid. Each HuMEL meeting has a different topic of focus, and today's meeting will be a follow-on.
Excuse me, can we just take a second? I'm not able to identify this person.
So Catherine, can we ask that you mute your microphone, please?
Lloyd, I think you can mute that person.
Yeah, somehow the back end has changed where we just can't.
All right, all good. Sorry about that. It just took me a second to find the participant square. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, gonna get back into it. Yes, if anyone has any questions at any point during the meeting, please feel free to send a message to Sid. He will help you with any kind of technical details. Anyway, moving forward, each HuMEL meeting has a different topic of focus. And today's meeting will be a follow-on to HuMEL's previous meeting on M&E complaint feedback mechanisms, beneficiary perspectives, and contextualization from third-party monitoring. We will be sharing that previous meeting recording in the chat, so you can take a look at that if you haven't gotten the chance to check it out. So this is just a brief agenda of what we're going to be going through. We're going to have the introduction of our panel speakers briefly, just the overall objective, and then we will be going into the presentations from USAID, BHA, IBTCI, i-APS, and then we will follow that up with a Q&A session, which Lloyd will be facilitating. Next slide, Sid. So, wanted just to give you a brief overview of our panel speakers. We have Anna Kennedy from USAID as an M&E advisor. We have Allison Wittenberg from IBTCI. She's the Deputy Chief of Party for the Iraq Monitoring and Evaluation Project. We have Rana Khalil from IBTCI. She's the monitoring specialist for the Somalia Monitoring and Learning Project. And we have Amina Farati from i-APS, and she is the president of that organization. Slide, Sid. All right, just going to lead this into the first presentation from Anna Kennedy. She is the M&E advisor at USAID BHA. And if anyone has any questions during these presentations, please post them into the chat and we will follow up with them in the Q&A session.
Okay, thanks so much, Mike, for that introduction. So good day, hello everyone. My name is Anna Kennedy. I'm a monitoring evaluation advisor at BHA. I've been involved with TPMs in one way or another, going back to 2015, where I've served as a contracting officer representative on a TPM contract. I've also worked in the field as an activity manager, and now working as an M&E advisor in our technical unit, providing oversight and technical guidance to some of our TPM contracts. In addition, we also have a work stream solely dedicated to TPM at BHA. So it's a topic that is very much of interest to us, and I know to all of you guys here. So I'm so excited to be talking about it today. So first, I just want to start with a definition of what TPM is at USAID. So third-party monitoring is the systematic and intentional collection of performance monitoring and or contextual data by a partner that is not USAID or an implementing partner directly involved in the work. So this definition comes from the USAID Learning Lab that was provided in a discussion note on third-party monitoring in non-permissive environments. This document is publicly available. I will put it here in the chat. I encourage you to read it and become familiar with it if you're interested. So when we talk about performance monitoring in this context, we're referring to monitoring the quantity, quality, and timeliness of activity outputs within the control of USAID or its implementers, including the sites where activity implementation is taking place. So in other words, TPM is a method of output verification that is a snapshot in time. I'm either getting some feedback or I think we'll need to have somebody else muted if possible. So at BHA, TPM, when used, is only part of the monitoring strategy. We rely on regular monitoring, including meeting with partners, reviewing standard partner deliverables, such as baseline reports, indicator data, annual reports, partner check-ins, and other ad hoc reports, such as biweekly reports. So even in contexts where we utilize TPM, it's just part of our monitoring strategy. And we would use a variety of other standard monitoring approaches as well. So, you know, from BHA's perspective, TPM really helps us as being the eyes and ears for USAID staff when we can't visit field sites. It's a really helpful means of verifying what partners, and particularly what sub-partners and sub-awardees are reporting, and I'll get into that in a second. It's a means for observing implementation, for having enumerators talk directly with beneficiaries and other stakeholders, and promoting the accountability to affected populations. So that can be accomplished through ensuring that partner feedback mechanisms are in place and operational. That can be complaint boxes, that can be hotlines. So we regularly ask our TPM contractors to call a hotline, to make sure a poster is there, to make sure that a complaints and feedback, that a complaints box is visible and that people are able to access it when they're on site. And like I said, really TPM is just part of an overall monitoring approach. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to talk about the other sort of component of the definition that we use for TPM, which is this non-permissive environment. And what does that mean? So it's an environment which refers to a context that is characterized by uncertainty, instability, inaccessibility, and security, in which USAID's ability to safely and effectively operate is constrained. So below you'll see a number of components or factors that contribute to a non-permissive environment. There are some additional ones as well. So frequently on a non-permissive environment at BHA, we do have the inability of staff to visit site activities, either regularly or in some instances completely inaccessible to USAID staff. Many times when we operate in these non-permissive contexts, it's a complex emergency, more often than we would see it as a natural disaster. It's typically a multi-year response. And on these responses, we do frequently see a high rotation of staff, both short and long-term staff, both DC and the field. I imagine some of you are familiar with that, having seen a number of staff coming and going over the period of implementation. In these non-permissive environments, we also see a lot of subawards because many times our partners that we work with are unable to implement directly, and so they implement through subawardees. So the more subawards we have, we've also found that that can also increase the level of risk during implementation. And then also frequently in these non-permissive environments, we have an increased scrutiny by stakeholders, both internally and externally, including the Office of Inspector General, the OIG. So it is in these contexts specifically that we may identify TPM as being complementary to our overall monitoring strategy. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about TPM process and management, sort of the how of how BHA implements TPMs and how this is really different from the implementation of humanitarian assistance. So BHA programs humanitarian assistance through implementing partners, as many of you know, mainly through grants and cooperative agreements. And we have provisions that allow us many times to do this on a non-competitive basis. So for most humanitarian assistance awards, oh, you can go to the next slide. The period of performance is 12 to 18 months, sometimes up to 24 months, but usually closer to 12 months. And this is the case for both NGOs and UN agencies. So typically when there's a disaster, when there's some sort of humanitarian emergency, within weeks, we can get money programmed to a partner and they can start operating either under a full award or under a provisional PAL before their award is in place. And that allows the work to start really quickly, which is very important in the context of an emergency response. TPM actually works quite differently than these processes that we have in place for our grantees. So first, we utilize a contract rather than a grant for TPM. So it's a very different mechanism. And that's because of the need for USAID to own the data, to collection tools and processes or products. So the process for us to procure a TPM is actually much more complicated and lengthy, and it can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months to get the contract in place, plus the time that is needed for the contractor to go through the process of the startup deliverables before they can do any kind of monitoring at all. So in other words, it is not a rapid process. Since this is a contract, the TPM contractor is required to meet what is laid out in the contract, specifically, and this is important, with the number of site visits. So if a contract specifies 60 visits annually, the contractor must complete that number of site visits to be in compliance with their contract. So that's one reason why it's really important for implementing partners for you guys to have clear communication with the TPM contractor, because if site visits are canceled or if they're delayed, that can cause really significant problems for the TPM contractor later on. So the TPMs are managed by CORs based in DC. That's a little bit different than how the rest of USAID manages its contracts. So typically within other bureaus of USAID, the core is based in the field, but at least for now, that responsibility stays with the core based in DC. And then we have activity managers in the field. The M&E team additionally provides support through a dedicated M&E advisor for each specific TPM contract. And so that M&E advisor would provide feedback to the core on all of the TPM deliverables, such as monitoring plans, protocols, the design of the survey tools, the flagging criteria, the reporting templates, enumerator training. All of those things are reviewed by an M&E advisor before that feedback is provided directly to the contractor. So finally, I just want to add that the decision to take on a third-party monitoring contract is not one that's taken lightly. In fact, BHA must make a careful determination before we move forward with the TPM procurement. We consider a number of factors, including our own capacity for managing a TPM, how the TPM would contribute to the overall monitoring strategy, any information gaps we think that the TPM could satisfy, and if the response is a priority for BHA that it would merit the investment of all of these resources that's needed to support a TPM. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I've talked a lot about what TPM is. And I just want to take a moment quickly to talk about what TPM is not. So it is not unplanned or unannounced site visits. That would not be appropriate under this context. We understand that because these, where TPM is happening is typically in, like I said, non-permissive environments where there are a lot of security issues and other things going on. We would never ask a TPM contractor to show up unannounced at a site visit of an implementing partner. So no one needs to worry that you're going to have an enumerator just sort of like popping out of a health facility or like lurking in your warehouses. That wouldn't happen. TPM is not an audit. We actually have a dedicated audit unit at BHA that looks at different financial compliance, et cetera. But that is not what TPM that is not what TPM is used for. TPM is really focused on performance monitoring. TPM does not have the capacity to verify project outcomes. That's really important. It's really a snapshot in time. It's really looking at specific output verification, but we're not able to use TPM to determine over the course of an award that your WASH project either met the objectives or it didn't. TPM is not a basis for future funding decisions. The determinations in terms of future funding is based on many criteria. TPM is not one of them. So if partner A gets a green flag on their health facility and partner B gets a red flag on their health facility, that would never be taken into account by a team for making a decision for follow-on funding. And then finally, unless specified in your contract, TPM is not intended to be garden variety M&E training for implementing partners. This has come up in the past where we've had TPM contractors who have said, hey, we can do this workshop and, talk about theory of change and indicators and, just basic M&E concepts for our implementing partners. That would be considered out of scope of TPM. Certainly, we would encourage implementing partners to have regular training, to do capacity building. We have mechanisms for that, but TPM is not that. We would, of course, encourage TPM learning around TPM. So I think in most of the contracts, we do have learning events once or twice a year where all of the implementing partners would be convened by the TPM contractor, and they can talk about best practices, any learning that took place that was specific to TPM under that contract. So that's just an overview from our side about what TPM is, what it isn't. I will yield back and look forward to our discussion and any questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Anna, thank you very much. And just a reminder to everyone, any questions you have, please post them in the chat and we will get to those in the Q&A session. Now we're going to turn it over to IBTCI, and we have Allison Wittenberg and Rana Khalil. And feel free to introduce yourself and a little bit more about your roles at IBTCI. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison Wittenberg. I am the Deputy Chief of Party for the IBTCI-led Iraq Monitoring and Evaluation Project. I've been in this role for the last 4.5 years, and IMEP is currently wrapping up its 5th and final year on this project. Overall, I've been working in Iraq on M&E or TPM projects for the last 12 years. Rana, over to you.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rana Khalil. I'm a monitoring and evaluation specialist on the USAID Somalia Monitoring and Learning Project with USAID BHA Somalia. I've been working in the field of third-party monitoring for almost 10 years now. And in the past, I've worked with international donors such as USAID, the UN, and the EU in places like Yemen, Kenya, Somalia, Syria, and Turkey. And I've been working with IBTCI for almost 8 years now. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Just to provide some background on IBTCI before we start in on the other slides, IBTCI has been in business for 34 years and has cultivated a solid reputation for providing and managing responsive technical services and supporting USAID, DFID, World Bank, MCC, and other clients in multi-sector portfolio-wide HuMEL contracts for local missions. IBTCI has provided technical assistance for in over 120 countries and managed over 24 multi-year M&E platforms. Recently, IBTCI has led dozens of DQAs, large and small scale surveys, impact evaluations, and local capacity building training workshops. Sorry?
Continue, sorry, that was just a disturbance.
CLI and GIS. IBTCI is particularly known for its TPM services in Syria, Libya, DRC, Iraq, Somalia, and Yemen. In recent years, IBTCI has led over 10 M&E projects for FFP and has been the MEL provider for Feed the Future. Next slide, and over to Rana.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, so we'll start off with the pre-monitoring agreements. SOLP conducts IP onboarding meetings to introduce the methodology and the goals, requirements from both the IP and the TPM, as well as share the reporting cycle, timelines, and the onboarding of the IPs is mainly used to establish a relationship between the TPM and the IPs and provide information on our scope of work and operating procedures. We also cover the tools that we share for data collection and the methods that we proceed to the site visits. So we have, the interviews, the focus group discussions, and we discuss all of that with them so that they're aware of exactly what the field monitors will be doing and will be collecting at the sites. We also use the onboarding meetings to confirm if the awards that we have reviewed that they've received from USAID are, currently ongoing, confirm any changes to any of the sectors that they're implementing or locations for their implementation. And we also request them to share any kind of protocols that they would like the field monitors or want us to focus on when we're in at the sites. We also identify one IP point of contact. So that's the primary focal point that we have for the IP for any communication and requests from our side and their side. And there's a secondary focal point. So that's the backup. We establish understand the timelines for data submission, for confirmation of sites, documents shared between the TPM and the IPs, and any other timelines that we have for the reporting. We provide them with the whole sort of cycle that we're going to be implementing for that round of cycles. We usually have 5 cycles throughout the option year. And so we do inform them that we will be conducting the data collection sort of around this time and what is required from them, and then what the products from us will be, which are mainly the site visit reports and the monitoring reports that we will share. The site visit reports we will share with them for their feedback. So that communication is done before the site visits are conducted, during the site visits, and then after the site visits. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we are conducting the preparations and the planning for the site visits, we select the sites from a database that's been created from the IP awards and confirmed by the IP. So now we are sure of the activities that are being implemented and almost sure of the locations that they'll be implemented in. And we share the sites that we've selected and confirm that this with the primary focal point, as well as the secondary focal point. And during that time, just before the cycle, we do share the information of the sites that we've selected for that round with the IEP and allow sufficient time for them to let us know if there are any delays or cancellations of the sites that we selected or the activities that are ongoing at those sites. We usually do have our local partners at in Somalia who will, give us an update of if there are any local holidays or elections that will be ongoing during the site visits. We request that the IP also inform us if any of the local contact points, be it from the main IP or the local IP at the sites, if there's any leave or there's absence of any focal points and points of contact that we will be communicating with during the site visits. And then if there's any contextual emergencies, like natural disasters or security incidents that might hinder or change the schedule for the site visits. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I just briefly said, the IP and the TPM partners should communicate days before and including the day of and during, the monitoring site visits to ensure the safe and secure environment. And this is crucial because we want to make sure that the field monitors that are assigned to the site visits actually do have a safe and secure environment. So they're going there and they're arranging their logistics to be able to conduct the site visits in the cycle that we have actually and the timelines that we've shared with them. So there's there should be no challenges to them during access when they're accessing the sites. And then to make sure also that we do have the activities are ongoing and there have been no drastic changes. For example, sometimes we've had incidents where the beneficiaries are sort of have moved on from the site, or due to the drought, the majority of the heads of households have moved on to search for pasture or water. And so we ensure that we're all on the same page, and the IP has provided, have informed actually the activity workers and the local IPs at the sites to ensure that they are there during the time set for the data collection. And then any obstacles or reasons for delay prior to the monitoring is shared with us, so that we may either reschedule that site visit, or worst case scenario, we might cancel the site visit and move it on to the next cycle. But usually all the planning that we do before an actual site visit is to avoid rescheduling and to avoid any potential harm that may come to the field monitors as they're accessing the sites. Next slide, please. Okay, over to you now, Alison. I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. I'm going to discuss some of the best practices that are specific to IMEP that can be used in a general way of just maintaining a positive and efficient relationship between implementing partners and TPM partners. Following up on Rana's importance of planning and communication, it's very beneficial for us if the IP is proactive in engaging the TPM partner for regular meetings. More specifically, with regards to IMEP, there are many partners that have a larger portfolio, so we find that they are monitored very frequently, so monthly, multiple visits monthly. With those partners, we conduct monthly meetings. So in those meetings, we'll talk about the previous month's site visit report, so the findings in the previous month. If there's any issues that the partner wants to discuss, or any key observations that or questions that need to be asked. Additionally, this is a platform for the partners to provide us with updates on their activity implementation status. If there have been any changes in activity site location, so camp closures or movement due to water shortages or issues. So just basically an opportunity for us to, kind of update the activities list to ensure that we're still on schedule for future site visits. It's very helpful in just providing updates on activity site completion too, if a location has wrapped up its activity at a specific location. Additionally, it's very helpful to improve the activity implementation if the implementing partner uses the findings both positively and negatively to better their activities. So in the reports, we include a lot of information, and sometimes some of the findings are both positive and negative. And even if the report or the site visit is assigned a green flag, it's always nice to see when the partners will address maybe some of the recommendations that are provided from the respondents, specifically beneficiaries, who tend to recommend either additional activities or maybe not even necessarily within the same sector that are being monitored, but just request additional services. And it's really positive to see when the partner will address those recommendations, especially if the report didn't have any negative findings. It's good to see that they're paying attention to what the respondents are, the information they're providing. Also, it's very helpful in maintaining and streamlining the schedule of the full monitoring visit when the IEP encourages all their staff to provide the TPM partner with the requested information. So we know that document verification, so logs or staffing lists or consultation reports, we understand that they most likely come from multiple sources within the organization. So it's helpful if the partner encourages their staff to be very forthcoming and provide us with the information requested in order for us to verify and triangulate our own findings in a timely manner. Next slide, please. So the IPs are encouraged to provide us with feedback to improve the usefulness of our monitoring reports. So twice a year, we were conducting IP workshops and maybe some other learning events where we would administer an informal survey to the partners and we would ask them for feedback on our site visit monitoring reports. So are our reports useful to you? Are there areas of the report that are more useful, least useful, or less useful? Would you like to suggest any new subjects that you would like to have incorporated into the monitoring visits? Or any topics or indicators that assist the partner in improving their own implementation? So kind of requesting this feedback from the partner is generally helpful all around. It helps us to continuously improve our, the formatting of our reports or just the different sections of our reports, but also typically if one partner requests it, it's most likely useful for additional partners. So I think that is all from my side.
So I just wanted to add, I'm sorry, Amina, I just wanted to add one thing based on what Alison just said as well. The fact that we have and share the site visit reports and the monitoring reports with the IPs for their feedback, for their comments, that's one of the main objectives. Well, for SMLP, one of the main objectives is the concept of learning from monitoring as a way to provide an adaptive management process for BHA USAID. And the SVR, the site visit reports and the monitoring reports has allowed BHA USAID to adaptively manage their programs and have a better sense of the sectors supported, which has provided sort of effective insights to the activity managers in their monthly meetings with the IEPs. And that's something we've learned, which is a best practice. So I just wanted to share that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rana.
Great. Thank you to Alison and Rana. Now we will be moving on to our third and final presenter, Amina Farati. She is the president of i-APS. And Amina, please take a moment to introduce yourself and a little bit more about what you do and i-APS.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to Ideal, HuMEL, and USAID for this great discussion. So I'm Amina Farati. I'm the president owner of i-APS, International Advisory Products and Systems. We're a woman-owned small business, and we focus on leveraging global expertise with a strong local footprint to work to help transform organizations and communities into partners for change. We work across a number of different areas, primarily in monitoring and evaluation and third-party monitoring, but also as part of the entire program cycle. So focusing on knowledge management, integration of learning, and capacity building, particularly of country national staff. We work a little differently than some of our other humanitarian partners, in which we really try to focus on hiring locally for the majority of our senior positions, and then supporting them with headquarters-based teams around the world. We've been in business since 2012. We're a for-profit company based in Alexandria, Virginia, and we have worked in over 26 countries. Currently, i-APS maintains active registrations in over 11 countries, including countries as diverse as Venezuela, Yemen, and operating in complex environments like Syria, Iraq, and others. Next slide. Here you can see a snapshot of what we do. As I said, our real focus is on the monitoring and evaluation, third-party monitoring, learning and knowledge management, as well as organizational development. And we work across a number of sectors relevant for USAID and implementing partners. Next slide. So here, I think this dovetails nicely into what Anna and the IBTCI colleagues shared in terms of how we see the approach to third-party monitoring. And I'll note that some of the best practices and tips that I'll be talking through today are really based on our experience as a small business and as a third-party monitoring provider, in which we serve as the prime when implementing partners contract out for TPM services. That might be a requirement from BHA or other USAID or other donors, for example. And we also serve as a sub on major USAID monitoring contracts, like those in Venezuela, in Yemen, and in other countries, where we work with larger primes, and we focus on the core field level data coordination and logistics and actual data collection of the TPM components. And so I think as Anna was sharing, we as a small business provider view ourselves as part of this cycle of monitoring and evaluation, in which we have a role to play in a number of different areas. And some of the most important parts are, in addition to that, critical cooperation and communication with the implementing partners is really the design of the third-party monitoring service itself, whether that's the design of data dashboards to visualize the data in the reporting phase, or going all the way back to the initial methodology in terms of designing your tools. Are they responsive? Are they adaptive to the type of programs that are being implemented by the IP? Are they contextualized for the environment? Are you asking questions that are appropriate for the country you're operating in, whether that's Venezuela or Syria? Are you taking into account gender considerations, for example, in terms of how the questions are being phrased, but also who's asking them? Are your team members including women, for example, at senior management positions? These are all the different factors that we take into account as a small business provider providing TPM services, whether it's to a prime provider like an IBTCI or others, or whether it's to the implementing partner themselves. Next slide. So in the vein of talking about some best practices and hopefully offering actionable tips, I'll focus most of my remarks on this slide here. And what we've tried to do is break down some lessons that we've learned in the 10 years plus of providing TPM to a number of different clients. And some of those might not be the most interesting things, but they're actually pretty important, and that comes from the contracting side. So for example, one of the recommendations that we often make is when you're an implementing partner or you're a donor and you're looking to contract for third-party monitoring, try to contract with entities that have a direct field presence. Sometimes multiple levels of subcontracting can make things really difficult when you're trying to maintain quality control over your contract and ultimately get the deliverable that you want, which are quality site reports, data that's raw and analyzed, and the ability to adapt your programs and learn as you go along. And so that's something that we at i-APS focus a lot on, is maintaining these local registrations, and hiring country nationals as a core component. Related to that idea of field presence is the fact that many times TPM providers on the ground who do the field work, like organizations like ourselves at i-APS, are exposed to significant risk, and really it's the field teams that are exposed. So these are the team members who might travel 2 hours to a site visit in a rural area. They might have no gasoline, for example. They might lose contact on cellular service. They might experience heavy rains and other delays. There might be armed actors in the region. So these are serious concerns, and we know that they play an important role in discussions with the implementing partners themselves during that pre-visit planning phase. They're really important when discussing the methodology with BHA or USAID, in planning the TPM missions, and also when creating the site visit plans and security plans to ultimately form the work plan for the TPM team itself that's going to get in the car and go and visit this facility or see this program in action. And that includes part of what we do to really focus on safety and security is really combining contextualized knowledge. And that knowledge can only come from country nationals who are present, who understand the local conditions, and trying to take that balance of hiring from the communities where work is being done, but not so close to the community that we could create a conflict of interest. And so this is always a source of consideration and sometimes tension in performing the work. And that is an important part of how you operate as a TPM provider. Some of the other pieces that I touched on is gender equity. So it's amazing to see a panel like this with all strong female leaders and to learn from others, and to see groups like IBTCI, MSI, and other primes who do a really great job of elevating female leadership in COP or DCOP positions. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. For us at i-APS, we try to strive for at least 50% female representation across the teams. And that doesn't just mean field teams, because that we found for some providers is an easy check the box mechanism in which they can easily hire female field staff, but not women in management positions. And so that's what we focus on, because we do believe that there is a difference in the work, and that does allow, I think, when working in particular with local communities, with beneficiaries, to be really responsive when you have that representation. I think related to that is what we focus on in terms of who we hire when doing our work. By hiring national team members, we're also supporting USAID's objective to really build the capacity of those team members. So we can couple international expertise, who might have a lot of expertise, for example, working with donors like USAID, with national experts who might be technical experts in their country, and to build their capacity. And then lastly, I'll close by saying that I hope we remember that TPM should be more than just check the box. It should be more than doing the minimum that might be required by the donor. There really is the opportunity to provide real-time snapshots of what's happening on the ground at a project or activity level by the TPM provider that can be used by the implementing partner. And so the more there is that helpful collaboration, communication, and partnership between the TPM provider and the implementing partner, the more that information, I think, can be useful. And that still allows the TPM provider to maintain that independence and objectivity, but ultimately supports the mission of learning and adaptation. So with that, I will close off and look forward to answering any questions during Q&A.
All right, Amina, thank you very much. And thank you to all our presenters. And you have Amina's contact here. So just take a moment for that. So thank you very much to everyone. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A session. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Lloyd, to facilitate this.
Yeah, thanks so much. And that was, I listened to this in a dry run yesterday, but I still have so many more questions coming out of it. But yeah, as Amina said, it's really nice to have this all-female panel present on TPM and tips and tricks. I'm left with one overarching question I'd like to pose to the three of you, and each of you touched on it, or four of you actually, each of you touched on it in your own way. And that's the importance of, I mean, as a sector, we're always talking about learning and getting this information. What do we do with it? How do we learn with it? And I get the sense that there's some field realities that kind of present challenges to this. And so what I'd love to hear from each of the presenters about what are some of those barriers that keep IPs and organizations and activities from internalizing some of the information and learnings coming out of TPMs, whether it's from internal side, whether it's from how data is presented side. But I'd love if you could just think about what are those barriers we're observing now, or you're observing as you interact with all of these awards. And Sid, if I could get you to highlight all the presenters, that would be really great. And then you can unshare your screen.
Just give me 1 second.
And maybe to start it off, I'll start it off in reverse order. So I'll since we have Amina here, Amina, I'll let you start it off, and then we'll go back to IBTCI and have Anna wrap it up for those.
Sure. So I think for us, what comes to mind is sometimes I think IPs can get caught in the program cycle. They're trying to work with their implementing partners as well, depending on the country where they're working at, and they're trying to implement the project. They're trying to do the good work. And sometimes TPM might be seen as an additional requirement that they have to complete, and kind of in some ways, maybe additional work that's beyond the scope of what they're doing. And so I think if we frame it, and I think USAID has been doing a really great job of framing TPM in the vein of it's part of your monitoring and evaluation, and it's designed to help support you in terms of learning, there is that opportunity. And sometimes it is just a matter of TPM provider and the country manager just picking up the phone and getting that 5 minutes to have that friendly conversation as colleagues and establish that rapport, and then from there being able to work on that relationship. Sometimes we found that that's the simplest thing and it doesn't seem very groundbreaking, but it is kind of that practical realities when everyone's trying to meet their goals and deadlines every day.
Right. Allison, maybe you take some of the barriers you're observing in the field.
Sure. Thanks, Amina. I completely agree with everything that you just said. And so as to not overlap, to go in kind of a different direction, maybe one of the barriers that we see with the implementing partners is the flag assignments. So, and I think Anna touched on it in our practice run yesterday. I'm not sure how much we went into it today, but the flag assignments, they're there, overall as a learning exercise, but not necessarily every non-green flag it means that the activity is a failure. So, the flagging system from our side is to generate awareness to the implementing partner of, areas of concern. Obviously there are more areas that there are flag triggers that are more severe than others, which do, kind of require a lot more attention. But for the most part, the flagging system is there to kind of alert the partner that these are areas that require more work. And it's not always received so positively by the partners. So, negative findings are there to allow for the partner to improve that part of the activity. So I would say that that's one of the barriers is how certain partners may receive more negative findings. Over to you, Rana.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can just add on to that. Pretty much every partner will get a red flag at some point, and that's fine. It's something like Allison is saying, that it's really about learning, and it's not, it's not a reflection of the overall award or the implementation. For example, we've had partners get a red flag because when the enumerators went to the site, there was no visible hotline or no visible complaint box, but the actual implementation was going quite well. And so they got a red flag. one of the reasons why that's helpful for us, I think, just for everyone's awareness, is because we get these reports and they're very long. And so it's an easy way for us just to look at, there were 15 site visits, and here's how each of them sort of, shake out. If we don't have any kind of indicator like that, like a flagging system, it becomes really, really lengthy and difficult for us to sort of parse through every report and try and come up with the same sort of conclusions. So in terms of maybe some barriers or some issues that make it more challenging, and this may seem contradictory, sometimes the reports are really lengthy, and that can become a barrier. When we get a 150-page report every month, and once we get that report, it's really our responsibility as USAID to be looking through it, to be making sure that we're actually following up. And if we don't, not only are we not doing our jobs, but that can put us sort of in jeopardy with the OIG to say, you got this report, you were alerted to this issue, and you did nothing. So for us, we're really working closely with the TPM contractors to the extent possible to try and streamline the reports, to make them a little shorter, to maybe remove some areas that we think are redundant. And that way we're able to really see what the clear issues are and how to follow up, because keep in mind, we're getting these reports every month or so. So we get a 100-page report, and then the next month, and then the next month, and it becomes quite difficult to follow up on an issue, even an important one that may have been raised 3 months ago. That said, the information that sometimes is less useful can be information that can be really vague. The activity is in scope, it's been operating well, beneficiaries are satisfied. What we need is the more granular information. Photographs are great, quotes from beneficiaries are great, really specific information about the product or service that they had and how it actually impacted their life in that day or in that moment, or over the course of that cycle of of cash distributions. So the more granular information that we can get that really gives us a flavor of what's happening on the ground is really, really useful. Thanks.
Thanks for that. And Ahmad just actually had a really great question come in the chat. I'll read it out, but I would love for IBTCI and i-APS to take a stab at so the question is, what would be the best approach regarding the distribution of roles and responsibility when an organization has their own meal team and are also hiring a TPM? What would each team focus on? And so if we could hear from IBTCI and i-APS in terms of your experience partnering with these activities around overlap of roles and supporting each other back and forth, and these what I envision is a very complementary engagement on M&E. So maybe you start with IBTCI this time, and then over to i-APS.
Okay, I'll just take a quick stab at that. So like I said, when we have our onboarding with the IPs, the first thing that they are aware of is that we are only going to focus on monitoring and verifying the USAID BHA funded projects. They usually do have a lot of projects, and that is one of the challenges where they have a lot of projects to monitor. They have their own, like you said, they have their own M&E people. But when we do have the onboarding meetings with them, they focus on one person that is our focal point to be able to help us with the BHA funded projects that we will be monitoring. And the fact that we then also request them to share their focal points, say for example, for WASH or for health, for nutrition, for protection. And based on what sites or what sectors we've selected for that cycle, that will be our focal point. And that is the person that we reach out to, and they provide then whatever information is needed. So it's very specific. We have all those layers, and then it sort of hones down into the person that is in charge of the sector that we are going to monitor during that cycle. And that just makes it a lot easier than generally reaching, say, the M&E person or the project manager or activity manager for the IP.
Great, thank you for that.
Yeah, I think similar to what Marina said, it is really complementary. I think part of it is having in the inception period or whenever the contractor vehicle is signed to talk about what are the distinct roles and responsibilities and what's the scope. So usually it's not monitoring everything that the IP is doing. It's usually a defined area. It might even be a defined geographical area, cluster, particular program locations or sub-partners. So having some understanding of that, having the TPM provider understand what is the overall scope of monitoring that the IP is doing so they can see how they're feeding into their system and ultimately how the TPM findings can also be used to triangulate anything else that the IP is doing as part of their own routine monitoring and evaluation. These are things that what we've helped find is just having that kind of close collaboration can help each of the teams support each other because they are working, I think, ultimately to that same goal.
Great. Anna, is there anything you'd like to add to that from your perspective, looking at a number of these reports each month?
You know, not really. I don't think I have anything to add to that conversation, but thank you.
Well, while we have you, Anna, there was a question earlier in your presentation about, and I'm paraphrasing a little here because I lost my note screen on all of my monitors, but around the difference between DQAs and TPM. So maybe you just take a moment to talk about BHA's perspective on that, and if in fact a TPM is a DQA.
So that's an interesting question. So as a component of many of our TPMs, we can do a DQA exercise, so a data quality assessment, and many of our TPM contractors will do that. So they will go through and look at a particular indicator and then report out on how that indicator is being used by the implementing partner, and really give us some very rich contextual data that can be useful to us as we think about perhaps revising an indicator or looking at if we think a partner is using an indicator in the way that we had believed that it should be used, or that we think it needs to be used. So that's really helpful information for us. I think that's one of the sort of tasks that we can issue under a TPM, is to ask for a DQA under certain contracts. We can also ask for evaluations from time to time. But in terms of the general sort of meat and potatoes of a TPM site visit, we're not really looking at indicators. We're not asking them to verify the USAID standard indicators. We're really just looking for sort of the snapshot of, you know, if we were to do a site visit as BHA, what would we be looking for? And we're sort of having the TPM contractor try and replicate that to the extent possible. But certainly both the TPM site visits and the other activities that can happen through the duration of that contract, including a DQA or a small scale survey, can be really, really useful.
That's great. You know, I'm curious because I have not had extensive experience with TPMs, but how did TPMs how are they affected by or evolved during COVID? Like, how has that environment changed? I would love to hear from each of you just on what that has meant and how it's affected the partnerships that are held in the field between IPs and TPM. And maybe this time I'm just kind of shooting in circles. So if you're keen to respond, otherwise I'm going to start top left of my screen. So Amina.
Respond like to that.
Oh, great. Thanks, Allison.
Sure. So yeah, our relationship with the partners during COVID. So obviously pre-COVID, we would hold quarterly face-to-face meetings with our partners just to, update, provide any differences in our monitoring strategies. During COVID, everything went remote. So beneficiary interviews, respondent interviews, monitoring, and more importantly, the verification of documents. So the relationship had to evolve more with the partner organizations. We had to create more intense data sharing agreements, or we had to establish kind of different boundaries. Privacy and confidentiality concerns popped up. Certain partners have more restrictive kind of measures than others do. In addition to just, sector specific challenges that arose that again, are different between all partners, be it protection or, health, privacy concerns. It was a learning process to understand the differences in the partner's willingness to provide, certain data, certain beneficiary information, or lack thereof. So it was challenging, but yes, I mean, everything's kind of out there now. So it was challenging, but it's all smooth now. So.
The cat's out of the bag per se, right? Amina, Anna, any additions that you'd like to add to?
Sure, I can jump in. We pivoted quite early in the pandemic to asking our partners to go remote and do remote site visits. We informed the contracting officer about that, and we did it obviously because we wanted to protect everyone's safety. So we wanted to protect the safety of the beneficiaries, the safety of the enumerators, the safety of our TPM contractor staff and implementing partners. And so we pretty quickly pivoted to doing everything remote, both for TPM and also for a number of things regarding how we conduct our regular monitoring. So that involved doing things, as Allison was saying, like having phone calls with beneficiaries, relying more on document verification, et cetera. I think we found to an extent that we wanted to make sure that in going to a remote site visit model, that we were making sure to include the voices of women, the voices of more vulnerable folks who may not have access to cell phones, et cetera. And so we know that it's not always possible to make it perfect, but overall, I think we were really impressed with the level of detail that all of our TPM contractors were able to provide during COVID. Really pleased that they found ways to pivot to provide information that we wouldn't have known through normal site visits. So I think overall it was a great learning opportunity for everyone involved. But we are looking forward, I think, to moving forward from COVID when it's appropriate to going back to having different in-person key informant interviews, to having small stakeholder groups, those sort of traditional things that we saw within TPM. But we're really impressed and very grateful to our TPM contractors who worked so hard to pivot during the pandemic.
Yeah, it seems like TPM was uniquely serendipitously placed. Like, it was the right thing in the right place before the pandemic hit to at least provide that type of information and support. One of our i-APS colleagues from Colombia, the country manager, Maria Mello, would like to add a little bit of her perspectives there as well. Maria, if you're able to come unmute, that would be great.
Thank you, and greetings everyone from Colombia. I will say that to answer to this question very specifically, during the pandemic and in the midst of this pandemic, we had just many challenges in the field, more specifically to collect data. So we had just to adapt ourselves to conduct TPM, which means not only the in-person meetings with the people, with the IPs, but also when we were about to collect data, we had just to, for example, develop these COVID protocols in which we had just instruct our enumerators and field monitors how to collect the data in a safe way. And also another thing that we had to do was, for example, cancel focus group discussions in the field, because following the safety protocols in the field, we cannot handle these because of the amount of people together, right? So these last 2 years have been a challenge for us in terms of guaranteeing the quality of the data and at the same time to protect our team and the people that are beneficiaries in the field. I will say that we hope that this will improve for the future, and then we are ready just to keep working. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maria. Anna, there's a question from Kundil at Save the Children. There's a section on TPM in the meal plan per the recently revised M&E guidance. What advice would you provide IPs on addressing this during a proposal?
Sorry, and if I could just add really quickly some background on that. So what I was mentioning in the chat was, it sounds like IEPs, again, speaking for Save the Children, we have a different understanding of, or have had a different understanding of what TPM is. So for instance, we might contract TPM providers to conduct maybe post-distribution monitoring in non-permissive environments. We did this a little bit in Venezuela during, sort of the height of the COVID pandemic. And then in other situations in development programs, they're very large scale. And instead of, maybe using our own staff, we don't have enough, or instead of hiring temporary enumerators, like on a quarterly basis, we just have a contract with a TPM. So now after this conversation, it sounds more like, at least for BHA and some of the examples that have been shared, it's more of that means of verification. So with that in mind, what would be some advice? Because again, when we see this in the proposal, when we're addressing this during the proposal, and again, this is optional, but we're thinking more of, are we planning on using TPM providers to outsource some of the meal activities, more routine monitoring? So if that's not the case, is it more from this lens of verification?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think when we talk about TPM sort of in this forum, we're really thinking of the traditional contract that BHA holds with TPM providers to provide us with the information that we find useful for programs that are operating in non-permissive environments. That said, I know within other awards, we do have different ways that our implementers do fulfill their monitoring and evaluation requirements. So many times, partners will actually contract out certain aspects. If they don't have the internal capacity, they'll contract out like the baseline. They'll contract out different aspects of their M&E component, and that is found within the budget lines of their application. And so that's something that is reviewed by BHA at the time of application, and we can sort of weigh in, and that's something that is generally approved. For certain contexts, we also ask that the partner procure their own TPM. When partners do that, we at BHA don't actually look at those reports. Those are really meant for the contractors as just an additional layer of monitoring, because we know that some of these contexts are so difficult. So it's really, I would say, to answer your question, I think it's very sort of context specific, and it can be very much a conversation between the TPM contractor that the organization is contracting with and what you would find useful, because that may be different than what we at BHA would find useful for our purposes. So, we're always welcome, we're always happy to have those conversations with you as you're talking to your different service providers on any of the M&E components that you're looking to contract out during the course of your implementation.
Thanks, Anna. And to kind of wrap up, I think we'll end up wrapping up early. I do have a final question for everyone. And maybe that you could use this as an opportunity to wrap up your own panel and say goodbye as well as we hand over between each of you. But just reflecting on what I believe all four of you have mentioned, how some of the best ways to internalize learnings coming out of TPMs. And I really like the way Amina said it, is that it doesn't have to be these formal official channels. Sometimes the best way to absorb and utilize information is these informal relationships, and it's that phone call in 5 minutes. I'd love to hear just an example, like a win. Like, what's your TPM win? Like in terms of either past experiences, looking back, or what you see the greatest value of TPM is, because we've all talked about how TPM is important for DQA or verification or non-pervasive. Like, what for you is the one TPM win that you'd like to leave the participants today kind of sitting with? And so I'll start with Rana and go around the horn, and with that, I'd also encourage you to kind of wrap up as well. So thank you so much. And then Mike, when they're done, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so I can say one of the greatest wins for us is for the TPM in terms of learning, is that everything we have done has fed into our learning, in the sense that we have advanced the tools that we use based on, you know, the data that's provided. We have reviewed the thematic areas that we provide data. Initially, you know, like I can give an example, initially we used to call them activity monitoring indicators. You know, over the years with the TPM, with what we've done, now, as Anna said, you know, they are not indicators, and we go for thematic areas. We focus on the crucial information that will provide both the IPs and BHA USAID with, you know, the information that they need. As USAID likes to say, you know, their eyes and ears. It's a snapshot, but the amount of information that comes out of the TPM has really, one, we have heard from the IPs how that has changed their motive of implementing. It has changed their outlook on actually what's in the field, especially for the big organizations who are not there, and they have like sub offices and field offices and then local implementing partners. And that's provided them that the data we collect and the learning that we've provided from the data that we collect has given them the opportunity to streamline their activities. It's provided them in communicating in a more effective and efficient way with the beneficiaries at the sites. And throughout this learning, we have constantly changed. We've changed our tools, we've changed our reports. You know, Anna said, you know, the reports used to be 100 pages long. We started off with 100 pages, and now our reports are 10 pages long. And we just go straight to the information that is so crucial to both BHA USAID and to the IPs throughout the learning that has been provided by the TPM throughout the years. And I'll end it there. And thank you guys so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this. Thank you.
Okay, I would say that a great TPM success that I can think of would be, you know, when we identify an area of concern, and a large component of our monitoring is beneficiaries as respondents. So we do conduct, you know, interviews with beneficiaries and acquire a lot of data from them. So when an area of concern is identified to the partner, and it is, you know, flagged in the report, and we feel that it's a more concerning area than others, a more serious issue, and BHA has been really great in allowing us to suggest or recommend follow-on visits, maybe months later, or, you know, even throughout another monitoring cycle to kind of follow up on that finding. And then to find that the beneficiary satisfaction has increased, and that, you know, that area of concern has been diminished or decreased and kind of resolved. So I would say that's, you know, really great success for us in TPM, and that has happened. You know, that's citing from actual examples. So thank you.
Yeah, you know, I can just say, taking off my M&E advisor hat and putting on my activity manager hat, that being able to have these reports that verified with photos specific activities that were happening was hugely important as an AOR and as an activity manager, because when I was in Baghdad, when I was in Erbil, I could go into these high-level meetings with the ambassador, with the DCM, with other people in leadership position, and speak with authority and say, this activity is happening in this place and beneficiaries are finding it useful. And I could do, and the only way I could really do that would be through TPM, because I had that information in hand. And when you're having those meetings at a high level, you know, you really want to be right. You don't want to be getting things, you know, wrong or vague. And so that information was really just indispensable at helping make sure that, you know, BHA was getting the credit sort of that we needed and that we deserved, that we were building that rapport in an embassy, and that we were able to speak with authority during very difficult times, during Mosul liberation, during Raqqa liberation. And that was a huge success for us.
For us, I would say as a TPM provider, it's two things. One that comes to mind on the technical side is just having that close coordination and collaboration with the client, whether that's one of the larger primes or whether that's with an IEP. I think that makes all the difference when we have that collegial relationship. On the other side, as a provider, I'll say it's being able to work with people and support their livelihoods. We're a small business, and as part of our TPM and as part of our mandate at i-APS to hire 50% women, we support jobs for women around the world. And so for us, we get a lot of deep satisfaction from hearing stories of women who are saying, you know, they never thought they had a career, and now they're becoming a data collector. They're seeing a wider opportunity for themselves in the humanitarian field, in their own community, in their own country. And so for us, we take a lot of value and we see that as a success.
Great. So just want to leave one moment here if anyone else has any final comments, questions before we wrap it up here. No, nothing from anyone. All right. So Lloyd, I guess we're ending a little early today.
Oops. Yeah, I think it'd be nice to give folks 15 minutes unexpected back to their schedules. It doesn't always happen nowadays. But
Indeed.
yeah.
All right, great. Well, just I want to thank all our presenters, Rana, Allison, Anna, Amina. Thank you very much for taking the time out for sharing your experiences today. We're all super grateful for that. I want to thank everyone for all their questions. Really interesting conversation going on. So we will be having the next HuMEL. We don't have an official date yet or a topic, but once we firm those things up, we will send out an announcement. We're kind of looking at September is probably when the next HuMEL should be occurring, and we will be making an announcement to everyone once we firm that up. So an email is going to be coming out in the coming weeks that will have a recording of this, and we'll also be sharing any resources that would complement this presentation. And as a final request, we would really appreciate it if you could take our evaluation survey for this event. It would really help us out and give us a good sense of the impact of this event and how these topics are really landing with people. So I think that's about it. We can wrap it up a little early here, and just want to thank everyone for attending today.